The gavel came down like thunder, sharp and merciless, scattering silence across the auction yard. $3. That was the price a man had set upon her life. The crowd muttered, some with laughter, some with pity, but none with kindness. She stood upon the crude platform, her wrists bound loosely with rope, the curve of her belly undeniable beneath the faded dress that once might have been lavender. She did not flinch when men shouted, did not meet their eyes when they sneered, only held her hand against her swollen stomach as if her palm could shield the child from the world's scorn. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and dust, thick with cruelty disguised as commerce. The auctioneer barked again, voice cracked from years of selling cattle and broken things. Yet no one lifted a hand, not until a low, steady voice cut through the murmurs. $3. The man who spoke did not raise his tone above the wind, but every head turned. He stood tall at the edge of the crowd, broad shoulders cloaked in a worn leather jacket, hat pulled low against the sun. Samuel Carter, a name that carried weight in whispers, a rancher known for silence and solitude. He did not haggle. He did not gloat. He merely repeated, $3, as if the matter were already settled. Laughter followed, uneasy and sharp. Some men jeered, asking what a man like him would want with a woman already carrying another's child. Others spat in the dust. But Samuel did not hear them, or perhaps he chose not to. He walked forward, coins glinting in his hand. When he dropped them into the auctioneer's palm, the sound was softer than the fall of rain. He reached up himself to untie the rope, the gesture slow, deliberate. For the first time that day, the woman lifted her eyes. She expected cruelty, expected the weight of ownership, yet what she found instead was a gaze not of hunger, but of recognition, as though he saw not her body, not her burden, but something quiet and unbroken that still lived within her. When she stumbled stepping down from the platform, he caught her by the elbow. Not roughly, not possessive, simply steadying, as one steadies a rider dismounting a horse. The sheriff, leaning against a post nearby, turned away, shame pressing into his shoulders. Mrs. Granger, the baker's wife, clutched her apron to her chest and whispered something like a prayer. The rest only watched, some curious, some contemptuous, but all eager for the gossip that would season their suppers. Samuel said nothing. His silence was its own language. He guided her through the crowd, past saloon doors swinging with laughter, past children chasing each other barefoot in the dust. Every pair of eyes followed. She kept her gaze lowered, her free hand resting protectively on the curve of her belly. Fear whispered inside her. This man had bought her, as others might buy a mule or a wagon. And yet, he had also freed her wrists with his own hands. He had not dragged her, had not spoken of price or possession. That silence unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. They moved down the main street, a strange procession of two. Sunlight spilled long shadows across the wooden boards where townsfolk stood staring. Some men shook their heads, muttering that Samuel had lost his wits. Women pitied her, believing her fate sealed anew. But within the quiet of each footstep, something shifted, like the first tremor before a storm. At the edge of town waited his wagon. The boards were scarred from years of labor, yet upon the seat lay a folded quilt, its stitching careful and plain. He lifted her gently, placing her where the fabric softened the wood. She sat still, stunned not by grandeur, but by the smallest gesture of thoughtfulness. No man in months had looked at her with such regard. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and with a flick, the horses started forward. The clamor of town fell away, replaced by the steady creak of wheels and the rhythm of hooves. The prairie stretched before them, endless and golden beneath the sinking sun. She breathed deeply, as if air had weight and she had been starved of it. In that moment, she realized the fear inside her had not vanished, but had changed its shape. It was no longer the sharp fear of harm, but the softer fear of not knowing. What would he want of her? Why had he spent coin when no one else dared? Why, when he could have bought cattle or tools or nothing at all, had he chosen her? Samuel did not answer, for he had not been asked. He only drove on, the lines of his face calm, almost sorrowful, as though he too carried ghosts. And as the last rooftops of the town shrank into the distance, the woman pressed her palm more firmly against her belly. Somewhere deep inside, a thought flickered fragile and wild. Perhaps $3 had not been her price, but her deliverance. Yet she could not know, not yet, that the man who bought her had no intention of keeping her at all. The storm came without warning, a black wall that split the sky and swallowed the prairie whole. Lightning tore across the horizon, thunder cracked the earth open, and rain fell so hard it seemed the heavens were trying to wash the land clean. Inside the cabin, she pressed her palms against the window frame, watching Samuel ride in through the torrent, his coat clinging, his horse lathered white with fear. He dismounted heavy, shoulders stooped, eyes carrying something darker than the storm. He entered without a word, boots dripping onto the floorboards. The air between them pulsed with the storm's fury, yet his silence was heavier still. She asked nothing, though her heart pounded. For days now, she had lived beneath his roof, tended by his quietness. He had given her food, shelter, and the dignity of space, yet never spoke of why he had claimed her. In his absence, she had pieced together fragments from townsfolk, how he'd lost his kin to fire, how his land stretched wide but empty. But the question remained like a thorn. Why her? Why now? Why at all? That night the question broke free, not with her lips, but in the way she set bread before him, in the way her eyes held his across the table. His hands lingered over the crust, rough and scarred. Then, as if the storm demanded it, he spoke. A few words only. "This ranch," he said, "should not die with me." His gaze flicked to her belly, then away. "You'll need ground to stand on." She froze, breath caught. He slid papers from his jacket, edges curling, ink smudged. A deed. His name scrawled upon it, ready to be struck off. The ranch, the house, the fields, all of it placed not in his keeping, but hers. He did not tremble as he laid it down, though she did as she reached for it. The storm raged louder, and she wondered if the world outside mirrored the world within her chest. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than air. "Why would you give me this?" He lifted his head then, and for the first time she saw into him not silence, but grief tempered into gentleness. "Because you were priced at $3, he said, "and that is a crime against heaven. Because you carry life, and life deserves roots. And because though I have land, it is you who has purpose." She stared at him, the papers blurring with her tears. No man had ever spoken to her as if she were more than her suffering. No man had ever placed worth upon her without asking for flesh in return. His gift was not ownership but release. It broke her more than cruelty ever had. The storm howled through the night, but inside the cabin there was only the sound of her sobs against the thunder and his quiet breathing across the room. She clutched the deed as though it were not paper but salvation. He did not move toward her, did not try to comfort her with touch. His respect was a wall that held her safe. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the earth washed and raw. She stepped outside barefoot, the ground damp beneath her toes, the sky pale with dawn. In her hand the deed trembled, heavy as stone. She turned and saw him saddling his horse, his figure steady, his hat low. He caught her watching and paused. For a moment, she thought he might speak again, but instead he tipped his hat, a gesture not of farewell, but of honor. Her throat ached with unspoken words. She wanted to ask where he would go, why he would leave the land that bore his name, why he would choose to vanish from the gift he had given. But fear kept her silent, the fear that to ask would shatter the fragile truth between them. He mounted, the leather creaking, the horse stamping impatiently. The sun broke over the horizon, casting his outline in gold. He looked once more toward her, his face unreadable in the light. Then, with a soft kick, he turned the horse toward the open plain. She pressed her hand against her belly, heart racing as if it too longed to follow. The papers fluttered in her other hand, fragile proof that she was no longer bound to chains, no longer weighed by the cruelty of men. Yet as his figure grew smaller against the rising sun, one question burned brighter than the rest, one truth she had not dared yet to face. Had he given her freedom, or had he left her with the burden of carrying both her child and his legacy alone?